Designers are declaring that Art Deco is the next big trend in interior decor. Good timing for me since I just bought an Art Deco house. Well, maybe. In the comments on my last video, more than a few people insisted it was in fact not Art Deco. Some said Art Nouveau, others arts and crafts. Guess we had better get it sorted out before I get to decorating then. So what exactly does Art Deco look like in a normal house? Or in fashion, in furniture? We need to go beyond the recycled versions of it for yet another Great Gatsby revival. Because it turns out that opulent, luxurious mansion filled with metal sculptures, towering columns, and sparkling parties was never the true Art Deco. That version went against everything the movement stood for and hoped to accomplish. In fact, Art Deco wasn't even used as a term until decades after the style faded. Instead, it was most commonly referred to as some variant of modern, mostly because that's what it was trying to create, a new style for a new world. The origins of the French modern movement go back to 1900, just after the Exposition Universelle, a sort of World's Fair. Germany had displayed a memorable exhibit of their own version of Art Nouveau styles, Jugendstil, youth style, presented as entire cohesive rooms rather than a display of random individual objects, as most other regions had done. They made the extremely ornamental style seem much more, well, practical. The Vienna Secession group was also close on their heels, with prominent artists like Klimt and Mucha producing far more popular variations of Art Nouveau. They too were formed with the intention of making art more accessible. Seeing all of this on display in Paris was concerning. A large enough number of French artisans recognized the disappointing situation this put them in and formed the Société des Artistes Décorateurs in 1901. Apparently, France had lost their formal trade system all the way back in 1791 with the Revolution and had not really re-established it, meaning there was no formal group to help manage or guide the industry, any industry. For the minor arts, everything that is designed that isn't fine art, mass manufacture was also leading to a loss of artistic style, as well as poor working conditions and forgotten skills. It was a difficult time for any artisan, but especially for those in France, as they had worked for centuries to build up a reputation of luxury and style. Note the recent video I did about the origins of haute couture. But without organized trades, they had sort of devolved into the copying of older styles, rather than creating new ones. Industrial production of 17th or 18th century furniture and decor was far more lucrative, just not very innovative. But what about Art Nouveau, I hear you say? Well, that was a response to the stagnant French designs. A necessary one to not only refresh the French design industry from the artistic perspective, but also a desperate attempt to salvage it in general. Other regions around Europe had embraced new technology readily, and along with cheaper wages, were now successful at copying the classic French style more cheaply than even France could. However, there's a big reason why Art Nouveau was not only short-lived, but didn't become popular and common enough to end up in every antique store across the US. It didn't answer the public's needs. Sure, it was attractive and innovative, but it was far from practical and difficult to apply. Characterized by scrollwork and elaborate natural forms with excessive applied decoration, the products required a careful hand and great skill. In a world of quickly growing mass production, the need to handwork each independent piece was a lovely dream, but wholly impossible. Society demanded both beautiful and achievable goods, which is why I'm so excited to introduce the sponsor for this video, June's Journey. Because if you love the Art Deco era as much as I do, you can build a whole town and solve some mysteries that are way more fun than trying to figure out why my old house is doing weird things again. June's Journey is a hidden object game that follows our clever sleuth, June Parker, through solving the mystery of her sister's murder and uncovering the family secrets, all set in the world of the Roaring '20s and gorgeously illustrated to capture the vibrancy of the era. Of course, just like this house, one mystery solved always seems to lead to another. and June keeps getting caught up in exciting and perilous situations on her journey. As you discover clues in each new place, the story unfolds, revealing mysterious characters, shocking secrets, and adventure. On top of all of this, you get to build up the island with gardens, houses, shops, and more. There are new exclusive themed items every month, too, so you can design your own little vintage town. I've got a botanical garden that just keeps growing. I found it perfect to pick up for a few minutes here and there throughout the day to take a break from all of the work. It's so satisfying to complete the scenes and extra challenges, all within the lovely Art Deco world. Please download from the link in the description or by scanning my QR code. And thanks again to June's Journey for sponsoring this video. And with all of that drama around Art Nouveau, well, the Society of Decorative Artists was formed in 1901 to try to salvage French design. However, it struggled to organize itself well enough to create a major impact. Events were planned and announced, but never carried through. There was internal fighting over who was qualified to join as well. Decorative art sat squarely in the middle of fine arts and industry, which meant that they had gray zones on either side. Failure of the group to gain respect also went hand in hand with the death of the French version of Art Nouveau. It was gradually replaced by a Belgian version and English arts and crafts. These retained the interest in nature's forms, but with a much simpler stylistic approach. Therefore, also more marketable. Guyer, who started the society, realized that they needed a different way to approach this. He stated, "Luxury in a democracy must no longer hide in pictures and statues in a gallery. It must show itself in the broad light of day, on the facades of houses, embellishing the streets and public squares." Was this not the ideal of the Greek people, and the same ideal with Viollet-le-Duc proposed for our democracy? This new movement was intended to be art for the people. Artisans were going to work with manufacturers rather than compete against them. Eventually, the society would start organizing annual salons in which members' works could be displayed. These had varying degrees of success, with a few standout artisans here and there. Though it was intended only for French designers, in 1910 the Munich Werkstätten was invited to join the salon. With similar aesthetics to the Vienna secession that had threatened the society into being a decade prior, their exhibition pieces were far more successful at tying together form and function under the modern style. Things were looking desperate for French designers, as they had failed to find footing over the same 10-year span that had managed to create the immensely successful Wiener Werkstätten and soon to become the Bauhaus movement. The society published a plea in 1911. The goal towards which our society is striving is nothing less than the creation of the French styles of the 20th century, an endeavor which, alas, has received too little encouragement. Not everyone has yet understood the obvious necessity of having styles that harmonize with our habits and tastes. Essentially, whether it's a trend or a classic style, if it doesn't function, it won't be easily adopted. They go on to talk about how everything, even the most basic of manhole covers, is designed by someone. What this modern ideal would look like was still not clear, though. André Vera, a landscape designer and theorist, published an article in 1912 calling for a new style to be developed that would harken back to French tradition. He even suggested elements like baskets and garlands of flowers for features, reminiscent of the 17th century elements. Vera's article is considered the inspiration for what would become Art Deco and influence countless designers. In fact, for the next few years, salons were heavily historically inspired and full of craftsmanship. But looking only to the past was what got France into this mess in the first place. They needed a novel approach to historic design, a modern one. But what exactly would modern be? According to Francois Carnot, writing in the 1913 Salon Catalogue, modern would be a new formula that answered fresh economic, social, or moral needs. Again, returning to the idea that decorative arts needed to be tied to the public's wants and needs. Ask for style, designers looked to early inspirations like the Ballet Russe and Scheherazade, simplified in ornamentation but vivid with color and bold lines. Instead of seeking out just one era or region to incorporate, Modern looked to embrace elements of all of them that had long been seen as too bold or shocking to be everyday styles. Ancient Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Mayan, African, Greek, Japanese, and more provided elements, colors, and striking proportions. Some of the most popular came from current events, like the excavations of Pompeii or King Tut's tomb. Some designers traveled the world for ideas, while others looked back to historic styles and found ways to abstract them. Cubism had an immense impact on the development of modern during the 19-teens. Natural forms were broken apart and reassembled with fractured, sharp lines. Color here, too, was not held to natural rules. This premise of abstracting the natural form would allow that broad range of inspiration to feel cohesive. Add in the technological ability to mass produce these designs on a large scale, as the pochoir stencil-based printing system had been recently adopted by France in the late 19th century, allowing for crisp lines and vivid colors like never before, and modern was finally beginning to develop. This is the point where we, as a current audience, can really start to recognize what would become Art Deco. It wasn't a smooth road, however. Though the society members were incredibly active over the entirety of the 19-teens, working with department stores like Bon Marché to build out entire rooms for sale, the war and societal distractions meant it just wasn't the right time for a massive shift in the decor of the common person. For the moment, it stayed within the realm of luxury for the wealthy. However, post-war, the populace was looking for a style that was full of hope for the future, while preserving the older culture of France, a perfect fit for the modern style that had been built on Vera's ideal. The society even themed its 1919 salon towards simple designs that would help France rebuild. By this time, modern design was full of iconic elements. Maurice Dufresne showcased the now famous abstracted floral print on wallpaper and textiles. Paul Folat's dressing table from the 1920 salon built on these geometricized floral ornaments with diamond trellis and cornucopias. The flower basket, garland, and bouquet was a constant throughout early modern designs. Natural designs brought together with geometric figures, clean lines and busy colors, warm woods, and stark cold metals. Modern was a constant marriage of two seemingly opposing ideas that somehow balanced. It does start to make sense why Art Deco is not the easiest style to define. While the society had finally found a new French art, small annual salons were not going to be enough to grow the society or the modern style. After years of petitioning the French government, they were finally granted permission to have their international exhibition. The post-war attitude of the government was much more supportive of the arts. To prepare and to prove that they were worthy of such an event, the salon in 1924 was flush with massive exhibits. Entire room designs devoted to this modern aesthetic, now fully formed and ready for the public. The international exhibition was organized by the Union Centrale des Arts Décoratifs, a government commission which set strict standards for the event. They determined that the restrictions were that the entries must be, quote, modern, and would be organized as functional spaces, not individual objects. Not everyone was pleased that it would be the government deciding what modern was, admittedly. Who was even able to apply was also under criticism. Though there were some subsidies, the spaces were funded by their creators, which almost kept the society from participating. In the end, the Ministry of Fine Arts volunteered to create a pavilion for French representation, allowing the members of the society to have a space. The Exposition Internationale des Arts Décoratifs et Industriels Modernes opened on April 28, 1925. It took over a massive portion of the heart of Paris, with dozens of temporary structures from groups and countries all over the world. While the focus of these surviving photographs tends to be on the numerous pavilions and their stunning architecture, every building housed entire thematic rooms, again inspired by the 1900 exhibition and the purpose of being a cohesive style. As no event this large can happen without at least a little bit of drama, the Purist movement had set up a stark pavilion that managed to clash even in this modern space. They argued that decorative art not only was dead, but should be, and could be replaced by machinery and mass production. Entirely function over form. The event organizers actually tried to build a fence to hide the pavilion, but they had to remove it. Honestly, there seems to have been enough of a catalog of art that the one building would easily have been missed. Thousands of pieces of furniture, glassware, ceramics, lights, textiles, metalwork, jewelry, carving, rugs, and even gardens covered the spaces. There was even a section devoted to couture fashion, with Worth, Jenny, Lanvin, and Calossure submitting work. Opinions on the success of the event were mixed. Many felt that the exhibits weren't achievable by the average person, nor were they grand works of art. On both original goals, they fell short. Was it modern? Sort of. It was certainly colorful and impactful, but overall, it was made up of luxury goods that didn't really invent anything new. Some didn't mind this at all, while others felt it departed entirely from their goals. The society began to split in two, but Art Deco persisted and continued to evolve, if anything, spurred on by this disagreement. While the luxury aspect continued through use of expensive woods and other materials like ivory and shagreen leather, others looked to simpler elements like glass and metal. In 1929, the group officially split. The décorateurs, intent that the goal should be function and accessibility, formed the Union des Artistes Modernes. Those that stayed in the society argued that aligning with the industrial side of production would put artisans out of work and dilute the decorative arts. Leon Worth, an art critic of the era, complained that it had become superficial, just like Art Nouveau. The flowers and scrolls had become too busy, so they simplified and abstracted them further and further. A rose would be too much, but a triangle, that's just fine. Eventually, it's all just still pointless ornamentation and busyness. Decoration is a natural desire, but throwing triangles instead of roses onto, quote, packing crate furniture doesn't fix anything. Disagreements continue to plague the modern movement throughout the 1920s and 30s. It didn't help that this was an era that embraced mass production, and with it came the out-of-the-box standard style for everything from furniture to fashion. The society's concern that artisans would become obsolete was not unfounded. It wasn't all working against the decorative arts, however. New technologies and production methods meant new materials. Plate glass, aluminum, steel, and reinforced concrete allowed for designers to build grander and cheaper architecture and furniture. Bakelite, one of the first versions of plastic, took off in the 19-teens and allowed for cheap copies of popular materials like tortoiseshell and precious stones. Rayon, the first man-made fiber that I talked about a few months ago, meant silk-like textile with stunning prints were far cheaper than ever before. Dyes were also increasingly color-fast, light-fast, and easily washable without fading. Fashions from artists like Sonia Delaunay are the peak of what was considered the modern style, meshing color, cubism, and fabric all in one. The Art Deco of the 1920s was bold and novel at the time. We've just since grown accustomed to things like steel tubing furniture, vivid fabrics, and concrete buildings. Society, too, would begin to normalize the modern style, and it would change to keep up. By the end of the 1920s, streamline moderne was inspired by machinery like automobiles, airplanes, and ocean liners. It retained the abstracted essence of earlier modern, but blended in the metals and sleek curves found in these industrial objects. It was still a battle with manufacturing, however. Though the arts may find inspiration in machinery, that same mechanized world threatened to eliminate them. The purist movement, honestly, didn't need to put any effort into making the world a mass-manufactured repetition. The next large exhibition in 1937 focused on this problem, countering what they termed scientifically structured barbarism. Manufacturers had gone well beyond the purists and argued that what people needed, or even wanted, could be discovered through experimentation and math, not art. We can see the repercussions of this mindset in places like kitchens, where it's assumed we all need to store the same exact stuff, move in the same way around the room, and operate with only one person at a time, with generally a small range of available color schemes to please our aesthetic needs. It wasn't just a battle for the beauty of art being accessible, but understanding that the space needs to work for an ever-changing audience. Thankfully, what transpired at the exhibition was not a rebound from machinery to over-the-top luxury, but a grounded application of art for everyday people. Exhibits meant to represent a doctor's house, or a space for an intellectual couple with lots of bookshelves. Even a young woman's room at a university club meant that these designs were intended to be functional. Of course, modern had a sort of time limit naturally set on it, as eventually society would change enough that a newly named modern would have to take over. Post-World War II, only a few buildings were completed in that style, in my opinion, my house included. The populace was ready to move on to other forms of art. It never entirely disappeared, of course, and has seen revivals over the decades. One revival in academic interest during the 1960s gave us the phrase Art Deco, just a shortened version of arts decorative, decorative arts. The 1970s worked to preserve some of the grand architecture and pieces, while the 1980s postmodern style was heavily inspired by modern lines. In some ways, this is the version of Art Deco we are more familiar with as a current audience. Movies and TV series set in the 1920s and 30s with aesthetic sets and costumes meant to evoke the feeling of an era, not to be truly accurate. Art Deco has been reduced down to its harshest geometric forms and excessive use of metallics. The colors and curves have been left behind along with the original intention. This is why it can be so hard to define something as Art Deco. Most materials are fair game, both expensive luxury woods or cheap aluminum and concrete. The graphics are both angular and curved. The content can be machinery or nature. Inspiration may have been ancient Greece, modern Japan, or even Cubist art. Sure, features like leaping deer are considered common, but certainly not necessary. For me, or rather for my house, the focus is going to be on color, strong lines, and impactful spaces that feel cohesive. I'll be bringing back some lost features like arched doorways, ironically both aesthetic and functional, as the loss of one of them cut off the vents to my bedroom. It may take a few months or even a few years, but hopefully my journey with this house will finally be able to answer what Art Deco can be for today. I just want to note this seemed to be the most controversial piece in the fact that it has some curves and plants and animals, but also it's got the harsh angular ends. So this is why I would argue that it's Art Deco, not only because it was carved by someone in the 1940s and the entire overall design was from the 1930s, but more so than anything, it's got geometrics. It's got references to historical styles with the dolphins and the flower in the middle feeling much more medieval into the 16th, 17th century and that styling. And the curves are not nearly as dainty as I think they would need to be Art Nouveau, nor is the heaviness of the rest of this carving feeling Art Nouveau. Certainly the angles don't. So therefore, the fact that we have all of these disparate elements brought together in an abstracted format, carved in a relief into limestone, is what makes it Art Deco. Because you can't just pick out one feature of this. It's the whole thing working together. It was designed this way. Not even regarding the fact that this house is a carbon copy of other houses that have clearly Art Deco features on the outside. Just by the time that this house was built post-war, it's kind of fading out. And therefore, I guess the designer decided to not aggressively put Art Deco on the exterior of the building. I'm still disappointed by that. On the daily. And of course, don't forget to keep that Art Deco feeling going by downloading June's Journey by scanning the QR code or clicking my link in the description below.